All right, we're going to give people one more minute to join. I can still see there are a lot of people joining, and we'll get started momentarily. If any of you have tariff questions that you want to ask now, feel free to go to the Q&A section at the top of your screen, and then you can submit any questions in advance, and we'll make sure that we get to them throughout the conversation. If for some reason we don't get to one of the questions during today's call, we'll make sure that we get to them afterwards and that we have someone reach out to you afterwards. All right, we're 2 minutes after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to say good morning, good afternoon, depending upon where you are in the world today. Thank you for joining our call today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. It's been a pretty dynamic last week, and I know there are a lot of people out there who have questions about what's happening on the tariff and trade compliance standpoint. So just to start with a couple housekeeping items. We are going to allow open Q&A. This session is primarily intended for you to ask the questions that you have. So feel free to use the Q&A button at the top of your screen to submit any questions. We'll have maybe 10 minutes of content at the beginning just to level set where we are today. And then from there, we'll go into the dynamic Q&A section of today's call. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, we will get started. We'll start by introducing our speaker today, Ratna Sharad. Ratna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, folks. Excited to, attest this format, actually. This is really exciting, given the pace of changes that we're seeing with trade and tariff wars. So I'm excited to be here and chat with you and try to help you guys with whatever questions you have today. I have 30 years of supply chain optimization experience and working with global trade compliance in countries around the world. Specifically worked with CBP on import and export implementations with various commodities, different carriers. So very much aware of how specifically CBP implements the import and their systems implement these changes. So excited to go over that with you guys.
Excellent. Thanks, Ratna. So just before we get started, want to make sure that everyone knows where they can get up-to-date information about what's happening from a tariff and trade compliance standpoint. We at Flavor Cloud have put together a trade and tariffs hub that you can access at any time. We are trying to keep it up to date almost in real time so that you should see anything that you need, any resources that you need to see the latest tariffs. Note that we are only using the most authoritative sources here. So we are making sure that you get it straight from the source. And we're providing those links on the right-hand side of the screen. So go ahead, and I believe that Hannah has put in the chat a link to that Trade and Tariffs Hub. Make sure that you bookmark that, go back to that frequently as well. So with that, Ratna, do you want to give us a quick overview and landscape of where we are today? I know a lot's happened over the last month.
Okay, looks like there are some folks with audio issues, but I'll let you guys, deal through that. This is the list of all the changes. This is very specific to the U.S. Trade compliance changes that have happened. We kind of wanted to provide a timeline view because a lot has happened since the beginning of the year. At a high level, let's start with each country. We have China, which is where the initial 10% tariffs on all imports with a country of origin. This is country of manufacture, China. Any goods coming with a country of manufacture, China, into the United States started with a 10% import tariff. And subsequently, as of 3/4, we've had a 10% more on it. So 20% additional tariff on China, country of origin goods. So it doesn't matter how you actually bring it into the country. It could be via Canada or Mexico or some other country. It's still based on country of manufacture. That's the important thing to understand. The underlying aspects of that and implications of that is that all of these goods used to come through a 3-2-1 program, which deferred the de minimis. So de minimis is $800 USD, and so any typically e-commerce shipment that was under $800 would kind of bypass all other tariffs that exist on goods. So what this means is the de minimis went away, and as a result, it is a tariff on all goods. Now, existing tariffs on commodities also apply in addition to this. And in addition to that, you also have processing fees that were applied. So it's important to understand that there are multiple pieces to the calculation of a landed cost. There's a 20%, there's the ad valorem tariffs, which existed for commodities before and never used to get applied because of the de minimis rule. And now those apply. And then the third piece is that the clearance mechanism has changed. So there's need for full declaration of commodity codes all the way up to 10 digits. And an informal under the radar clearance of a type 86 has gone away. What that really means is that you have an informal and a formal clearance mechanism. And in both of those cases, you will now see tariffs. Now, going into Mexico and Canada, we have 25% for country of origin Canada and country of origin Mexico. And again, a similar, concept applies. So essentially, any goods that are brought into the US with the country of origin of these two countries now have the 25%. There are reciprocity tariffs as well that have been imposed, and you can kind of see that here. China has imposed 10%. It's specifically on agricultural goods. So unlike the sweeping tariffs that USA has applied on really most CPG categories, we see something very specific from China. So it's more agricultural products, and so there's a 10 to 15% depending on the commodity. And then the other thing to note is that this is a very fluid environment. As you guys are seeing, the news cycle is a little insane here. Things are happening every day. Things are being implemented every day. Some of these we've tried to mark as confirmed, because it's one thing to say we want to implement these changes, but CBP is actually struggling with the massive volume, and therefore actual enforcement of the de minimis of the 3-2-1 is somewhat delayed. So it's a matter of time, and the best thing to do is kind of look at the resources provided here to see if these changes are live. Also note that if you are using Flavor Cloud, these changes get implemented as immediately as CBP implements them, or even other countries implement them. So I will leave it there, and we can go to questions.
All right, so we're going to stop sharing on the screen now and go to those direct questions that we're seeing in the chat right now. As a reminder, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get to it during today's call. So let's go ahead and start with the first question that we received, which is, how do tariffs impact what customers in Canada or Mexico will be charged when purchasing from our site in the US? Do we need to let them know to expect additional charges?
So this is, sorry, so this is customers that are in Canada and Mexico
Correct.
purchasing. So this is US outbound going to Canada and to Mexico. Is that correct? And it really depends on the commodities, is the short answer. So when for Canada, there is a de minimis in place. There's also a de minimis in place for Mexico. Today, the landed costs assess all of the duties, taxes, and fees, and that is something that you should be charging your customers for Canada or Mexico. Now, the additional tariffs that have been instituted by Canada or Mexico are in very specific commodities. They have not instituted those changes in like CPG categories across the board. So it's very specifically, you have energy related, automobile related, tariffs. So this isn't something that impacts everyone yet.
Okay. Can you give us an example of some of the types of products that are impacted made in USA going into Canada for the 25% tariff?
So the 25% tariff is for goods that are being imported into the US, right? So Canada, country of manufactured goods. And so it could be apparel. It could be any of the consumer categories. So clothing and apparel is one big category that will see the 25%. And same for Mexico as well.
Okay. And inbound to Canada also with the Canadian 25% tariffs,
Mhm.
same types of products.
No, not the same
Okay.
types of products at all. In fact, they have very surgical, they are doing, right now the tariff is on energy. It's also on automobile.
Okay. And we also have a complete list of goods on our site if you want to
Mhm.
see exactly which products are impacted as
Yeah.
well.
Mhm.
Excellent. Okay. Next question. Our product's origin is China. We use ShipBob Warehouse in the US to ship
Mhm.
orders to Canada with Flavor Cloud DDP. Will we be charged tariffs based on USA or based on China tariffs?
So the first thing to look at is how are you bringing those goods from China into the US, right? So that is a B2B move. So when you bring those goods into the US, if it is for consumers that are based in the US and you're fulfilling that domestically, then you're paying tariffs on the B2B import coming into the country. Now, if you are going to eventually ship that out to the rest of the world, then you can have a bonded warehouse, an FTZ, and essentially not pay tariffs because it's eventually being exported out of the country. So it is not something that is for consumers that reside in the US. So in those cases, you don't need to pay tariff. It is if it's going to be imported and exported out right away.
So, what are some actionable things businesses can do when they're being faced with these tariffs? What should merchants be thinking about right now?
Yeah, there are multiple things that we should be thinking about. One of the things is just really understanding classifying commodities accurately. So really understanding what the classification is, getting to the 10-digit code, understanding what the landed cost implications are of these new tariffs. So it's not just the duty and the tariff that now gets applied because the de minimis goes away, but also these that are now in place, there are fees, processing fees that are also being added. So really understanding a complete cost benefit analysis is important. These fees can be anywhere from $1 to $30. This is processing fees, customs processing fees that gets added on. So fully understanding what that is. Second, looking at alternate supplier locations. So really thinking about how do you diversify your supply chain, diversify. So instead of manufacturing in China, you could look at an alternate manufacturer in a different location. We have merchants that are looking at Vietnam or China. That could be an implication. Or if you're manufacturing in Mexico, looking at an alternate, location of Colombia. Now, again, these decisions cannot solely be based on the 25% tariff that is being applied, because oftentimes labor costs, so fully understanding all of your costs, this includes, rent of facilities in Mexico. It includes, labor. It includes any kind of operational costs that are involved in managing a warehouse, let's say in Mexico. And then fully understanding what the implication of this tariff is to your business. And it's slightly different for every business. It may be different for an apparel business than it is for a toys business. So really looking at what those implications are, and then kind of deciding on diversifying, supplier is one of those best practices. There's also looking at, are there other things you could do in terms of, it's called tariff reengineering, but really thinking about, are there things where you could add value by doing additional embellishments in a different country? Is that possible for your goods? Really thinking about, how does that change the duties, taxes, or tariffs? The fourth one I would say is looking at your commodities themselves, and looking at the different SKUs that you have for international, and looking at the ones that are your high value SKUs versus not so high value SKUs. How do you think about pricing? This is end consumer pricing. How do you think about that for your business? So really thinking about, obviously, your margins, understanding your margins are critical. How much do you want to pass on to customers? What are the types of optimizations that you can do for these high value SKUs, but ultimately deeply understanding your consumer pricing strategy, so that you're not shot on the margin front. So those are some of the key strategies that businesses should be looking at. And in addition to that, it's about really being nimble and future proofing, because this is not the end of the tariff. I mean, today we're talking about the 20% for Canada, for China, and 25% for Canada. But it could be a different number, or it could change. We're also hearing about other countries around the world going to receive reciprocity tariffs. So overarching message, I would say, is about being nimble. It's about having a carrier network that can really comply with all of the different nuances, because oftentimes these new clearance mechanism cannot be supported by everybody. And so making sure you have redundancy and resilience, if you will, in your supply chain, as it relates to your vendors and suppliers, your manufacturing locations, but also as it relates to your carrier network. These changes need to be implemented real time. So working with somebody that can reflect these changes real time, because non-compliance has its own set of additional fees and additional burden on your margins, which you don't want to get to.
So those are some great points, Ratna. Just building on that non-compliance, what are some of the risks if merchants aren't compliant?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's a variety of risks here. There's customer service implications. So think of not having the level of detail now. You don't have the under the radar type of clearance anymore into US. So think of it as higher scrutiny. The type O1 and the type 11 are two methodologies that are available. One is the formal clearance, and the other is informal. But in both of those methods, you have a requirement to declare the 10-digit codes and have the country of origin and have accurate declared value and description. All of these things need to be automated. As you can imagine, there's billions of shipments coming in and every year. And so there's a need for CBP to get these declarations electronically. If you're unable to do that, then that means it's going to get stuck in customs. And when that happens, there's going to be not just the fees that you've calculated as part of landed cost, but really additional storage fees, additional, demurrage and other fees that get applied. And it's just going to make it erode your margin. It is also going to make the consumer experience really bad because it gets stuck and it's going to sit on the up to 10 days and then they'll reject it. So it gets sent back. And that is even worse. And that can be a big hit on the margin. Returns can be really expensive as well. So that is one of the operational implication of non-compliance. But there's also the other implications of non-compliance. So if you're not accurate in any of these pieces of information, and then it can lead to audits. It can lead to additional requests from, a CBP and other customs organizations around the world do the same thing. It can lead to significant fines. These are enormous fines that can even bring businesses down. It could be, legal implications. You could go to jail for certain types of declarations. So it can be any number of things that are much bigger implications as well.
Okay, thanks. So we've got a lot of questions coming in here. One question from William asking about clarification on de minimis and
Mhm,
321 and
mhm.
is 321 dead?
Yeah.
And will it also apply to other countries aside from China, Mexico, Canada, seeing as, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, will it to other countries? I mean, by the looks of what is happening, likely, although we don't know until it actually gets done. But if we were to ask me, would that be happening for other countries? I think if it goes the same way, yes. And reciprocity works that way. Because, for example, EU for VAT has no de minimis, right? It's zero. So if you're looking at reciprocity, it's similar. So there's reasons to believe that's what will happen. Today, 321 is technically it's dead in the sense that you have the $800 de minimis that does not apply, and therefore you do not have exemptions for these three countries of origin that we've been talking about: China, Mexico, and Canada imports into the US. But the enforcement is behind. And it's really hard to say when the enforcement is going to kick in because technically it is something that's being implemented by CBP right now. And I would not, we should assume that 321 is dead and that the de minimis does not apply anymore for these regulations, these three countries.
Okay, thanks. Getting some really interesting questions in here. What's the most important information to be accurate to ensure correct tariff calculations?
Yeah. So the HS code, which is the harmonized commodity code, is a critical piece of information. So this is where a commodity, let's say a women's wool sweater, is different than women's cotton sweater. So the 6-digit HS code defines what the commodity is. The remaining digits, up to 10 or more in some countries, are very specific to the country. So, for example, the 10-digit, HS code for the US is different than the 10-digit HS code for the same commodity in, say, China. And so it is really important to get specific on that, because that will ensure that, the material, the composition, and therefore you get to a much more accurate landed cost. So that is one component. The second is the customs value. This is the declared value of the product. It typically is the sale price. So essentially what was paid in the case of DTC by the end consumer. And in the case of B2B, it is the actual sale value. Right. So it is important to be accurate with customs value, because that is what is used for assessment. Now, the other components of country of origin really come into play as well, because obviously these changes, for example, these tariffs don't apply if the country of origin is Malaysia, at least not today. So there is a, onus on country of origin. There is also trade agreements that come into play. So, for example, USMCA, that still is in play. So you will get benefits from USMCA depending on your commodity. There may be specific lower tariffs or no tariffs, and that still applies. So it's really important for country of origin. In addition to that, there are different rules in terms of calculation for landed cost for different countries, and that's a CIF. So cost includes with insurance and freight is CIF, while FOB is a model where it just takes the value of goods, which is free on board. So you've got these different models that all depend on these pieces of data, but that is for the duty and the tax calculation. There's a whole slew of other fees. These fees are dependent on the country. So each import country has different types of fees. So specifically for the US import, it can be anywhere from $1 to $30 that we see right now, that are processing fees. It's for CBP to process, for like an actual formal customs broker to clear his processing fees and so on. And it varies by commodity as well. So these are all that's why it's not easy number or calculation. It is very dependent on all these different aspects, and it's a very dynamic calculation. It's important to be as accurate, and that's why we kind of focus on the guarantee and accuracy at Flavor Cloud. But it is a very hard problem to get right, and to know because the difference is, what do you charge customers? You want to make sure that you're charging them the right thing upfront, your end consumers, and therefore it's not out-of-pocket expenses for you as a brand after the fact.
Okay. Thanks, Rotna. You talked about HS codes, and we're getting a bunch of questions from people about, can we get a list of HS codes that are impacted for each of the countries?
Yeah. So we had one of those. We can post those. We can have Hannah post that specifically for, the US. Canada, it's a very short list.
Okay, excellent. So we'll get that out to the attendees, make sure that you have access to that. Excellent. Then the next question from Jordan in the chat, is there any anticipation that customs documentation requirements may change in addition to tariffs? With or without changes, is there anticipation of an increase in fines for errors in customs documentation?
Absolutely, yes. So the clearance requirement, when I said declarations, it really is electronics customs declarations, which is the same as documentation. Especially with Flavor Cloud, we're doing electronic filing and automation for all of these pieces, and therefore it's electronic. But the same thing applies for a manual commercial invoice or other brokerage filings. It needs to be accurate because you don't go under the radar through like a postal clearance or a Type 86 clearance anymore. We've got the informal clearance if it is under 2,500 USD, and a formal clearance if it is over 2,500. And even in the informal, now it's a much more rigid requirement because ultimately they are assessing duties and taxes on everything, everything origin, China, Canada, and Mexico. Therefore, the requirements are much more rigid. Yes.
Okay. It sounds like there's been some excitement even while we've been on this call right now, Ratna.
Okay.
So as we've been on the call, headlines have begun rolling in about US delaying Mexico tariffs until April 2nd. So with all of these frequent changes, can you advise merchants what not to do? Like what actions could be too permanent? How do they stay flexible during this?
Yeah, and I think I'll go back to being nimble, right? That is the key. Now, as you can see, that's why I don't want to give here's the tariff because this tariff is very specific, and then it changes the next day, and then it's a different. So you almost have to come back to our hub to see what is real on that day, and we only implement the changes when it is like actually implemented. But so there's the custom system implements those changes. That's when we implement the changes as well. And I think that's key. You want to work with a provider that's going to take some of this, provide the guidance for you. And this is a nightmare to manage. It is we do this all day, every day, and it is a lot for us. Like by the time I'm here on the call, there's a change. And so this is something that, you want someone that's deeply understands trade compliance and is ensuring that you're compliant and de-risking you as a merchant. I think that's the biggest takeaway. And then really think about, how do you future-proof your supply chain? Having redundancy and resilience is a good thing. Just in general, I will say that the US and the pace of changes is quite insane right now with this administration. But worldwide, a lot of this has been happening for the last 2 to 3 years, and we actually expected it to accelerate, in other countries around the world. And that's simply because international commerce and even B2B has seen a significant, uptick, 2 to 4x over domestic. And so it is really significant. And so everyone wants a piece of tax revenue. And so this was happening before this administration, but what is really difficult here with these changes is that it is so real time and it's back and forth as well. And so that's why I think you want to, de-risk yourself, find someone that knows what they're doing and is protecting you, is working with you on understanding your margins so that you can help you can actually make some decisions around how do you have alternate carriers in place, alternate, suppliers in place, and maybe a prong strategy on that, regardless of what is happening here with specific countries.
Okay. So, Ratna, a lot of what we focused on so far has been about people importing into the US goods made from China,
Mhm,
Canada, or Mexico. What
mhm.
about the retaliatory tariffs against made in USA goods? So, people who are shipping out. Can you give us the landscape there and talk a little bit more there?
Yeah, so one thing I will say, the US was had a very high de minimis. This is not like rest of the countries around the world. They actually had a very low de minimis, depending on the country. Like Canada's 40 Canadian dollars. The UK has 150 GBP on duty, but zero on tax. So it's very different by country. So I would say US was the one of the more generous de minimis countries. Australia is another one that has a high de minimis of 1,000 AUD. But so the implications are more on the imports into the US is the way to think about it. A lot of this has, it's a little different for other countries. Now, having said that, can they change a tariff on certain commodities and say, oh, made in the USA, apparel will see additional, 10% tariff into this country. Is that likely? Yes. We don't know what each country is going to do because we're starting to see the Canadians talk about more specific commodity-based tariffs. And so if other countries start doing that to say that, okay, since as soon as we say, for example, EU, we're going to have, Trump is calling it reciprocity tariffs, but they may come back with very surgical, 301 gets additional tariffs, or some category or subchapter gets a certain tariffs. And then that would be in addition to what's there in place today.
Okay, thanks. Now, we have a specific question from William on any changes to EEI filing requirements in Canada. Are those still exempt, or will line items valued at $2,500 or more now require filing?
I am not sure of that. That is something we can take back and look at. I don't know if WIT on our compliance team has any additional details.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, no changes. So export filings to Canada are not required, even if the shipment is over $2,500 in value, unlike other countries, unless it's subject to some type of import license, export license requirement from the United States. So no current changes to the EI filings to Canada.
Excellent. Thank you so much for hopping on, Wit. Appreciate it. All right. Okay, just a reminder for everyone, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. We've got just a couple more questions that I can see right now. And specifically, what strategies can business owners employ to manage the uncertainty caused by these tariffs? I know you've
Uh,
covered some of it, but maybe
yeah.
jump in.
It's like work with an expert on this and de-risk your business. Really understand the implications based on your commodities. So deep dive into what does this mean? Where do you manufacture today? What are these tariff implications to your specific SKUs? A full understanding at the SKU level, I think, is really important. And then that can inform your consumer pricing strategies, your diversification of supply chain, if that is something that you should consider, because the answer is not always, you need to, move to a different country. It really depends on the math. And so understanding what the implications are for your business at the commodity level And then one of the other strategies is looking at nearshoring, right? Again, nearshoring is one of those things you might look at, should I have inventory in the US, a bonded warehouse, an FTZ, a free trade zone. Those are all considerations, yes. But again, it's a full picture to make that determination of, how much are you shipping outbound the US to rest of the world, and really making the decision based off of that.
Excellent. Now, how is Flavor Cloud keeping up to date on everything that's happening from a tariffs perspective? And how is Flavor Cloud building this into the product to make sure that all of the merchants leveraging us for DVP are staying up to date?
Yeah. So great question. It's so Flavor Cloud is a little over 7 years old. It actually was some our prior startup had around 5 years of automation in global trade and customs automation. So it's a lot of experience in kind of automating every single country's import clearance mechanism through our customs clearance network in 220 countries. But also we rely on technology. There's different aspects where AI comes in as well for a higher degree of accuracy. Product classification is one of those things where we automate and it's fully dynamic. That is really critical because the nuances matter in HS classification based on what we talked about before. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the landed cost. I talked about the complexity of it. So really getting it right. And especially because we guarantee and do guaranteed DDP, which is a really important mechanism because the moment you do DDU, all of these issues compound. So really staying focused on DDP and leveraging our AI engine and to do that for accuracy has certainly helped brands stay uh, as unimpacted as possible. I cannot say that this is no impact, but at least you know that it's accurate calculation and it's real time. But we built our engines and our data, the underlying data is from every single country source, and we do this dynamically. This is all automated, and that's really important because this is not something that you can have manual intervention and deal with a shipment and, whether it's clearance or it's figuring out landed cost or it's understanding HS codes. All of these are very complex functions. And with the pace of change, though, and the way we kind of refresh our data and keep everything up to date is on a cadence, and the cadence may be it's quarterly or some or yearly depending on the country. But now it's a very different model where we're having to keep our data source accurate. Like today, we'd have to go see what the implication of the announcement is when it actually goes in effect and kind of put it in place. So it is a configuration because we've created the mechanisms over the years and automations, but it's still important for us to stay on top of it because it's real time.
Okay. I actually think this question that we just received kind of builds on that, asking for a little bit of clarification. So for DDP customers using a software like Flavor Cloud, are they paying any applicable tariffs as they change in real time at checkout, or will they get a secondary invoice before delivery?
I cannot speak for other platforms. So this is so for Flavor Cloud, it's just one bill. So DDP is going to be fully inclusive of the changes as of that day. So we're going to be real time, and so it's going to be the fully landed cost. It's going to be guaranteed DDP. That means if there is a different assessment that is on Flavor Cloud, we never do an invoice post fulfillment. So after the shipping label has been created with that, it really is on us.
That's great. So no surprises
No
for the merchants using
surprises.
us for DDP.
And that's why it's really important. I think one of the ways to protect yourself is ensuring that you have DDP. If you're doing DDU, I think it is going to cause, for whatever reason, and I don't think DDP is a good model for international in general, but given the current environment, it can be. There's no way that you can control any of the aspects of DDU, even from a clearance standpoint. So that can be really hard.
Okay, excellent. So we've been talking a lot about the direct to consumer. Can you tell us how merchants need to think differently about their B2B versus their D2C business as they consider tariffs?
Yeah, so it applies to a B2B, shipment as well. Now, typically the B2B shipments tend to be a lot higher in value, and they will not usually be under even the 2,500. So you're looking at a more formal clearance process. The tariffs apply, just like they do for D2C. There is implications for based on commodity, right? So it's all based on commodity again. Flavor Cloud, we do B2B, and we automate all of it, very similar to D2C. So as part of the DDP landed cost, we do provide a guarantee on B2B as well.
Okay, we got a little bit of feedback on that, on the last sentence there. Would you mind repeating that last sentence, please?
Yeah, so I was talking about Flavor Cloud's B2B. So
Mhm.
we have a fully automated B2B solution, which is for air and truck network. And that functions very similar to DTC in terms of automation end to end, but takes into consideration all of the implications that are unique to B2B. And we offer a guaranteed DDP model for that as well. So that kind of eliminates a lot of the manual stuff that you typically see for first mile or last mile or brokerage or other aspects, but certainly also the DDP aspect.
Okay. So you've just been talking about DDU and DDP. We got a great question here. Given everything that's happening, is DDU dead? What kind of delays should DDU shipments expect at the border these days?
Yeah, I mean, DDU should die at this point. I wouldn't recommend that, given the current environment. We've always been talking about why DDP is beneficial, and it provides such um, a much better consumer experience, certainly better experience for the merchants. Your ability to manage your margins is a lot better. Obviously, all of these things existed pre the current tariff wars. But now, more than ever, given all of these implications, it is so unpredictable. Imagine that, the consumer is responsible for clearance. They are what's called uh, they are responsible as the IOR, but typically the onus goes back to whoever the shipper is. So the consumer can refuse a parcel, right? Ultimately, if there is a fat bill that shows up, it's completely unexpected, which is what will happen. Now, they're going to do either refuse the parcel, or so they're going to refuse the parcel. You are either going to bring it back and pay return shipping on it, or you're going to have to destroy and abandon. And both are horrible for margins. And so it's really important to understand the implications that now the bills are going to be much larger. There is no such thing as going under the radar and hoping that there is no, duty or tariff assessed, because there is going to be a tariff. And so it's really important that to protect yourself and the customer experience, that you move to DDP if you haven't already. And the other thing is, what is the delay? It's really hard to predict. If it is DDP, you can control it somewhat. We are not seeing any delays with Flavor Cloud. We've only seen maybe a day clearing through Flavor Cloud, but that's not to say that there is no congestion in CBP and all of these things. And if you don't have documentation, which you never do for DDU, and the declarations aren't, all the things that I talked about in terms of declarations, we're very specific to us doing DDP declarations because we're kind of clearing it through customs. But now, if it's DDU, you're on your own. There is no such, checks on what is being sent. So let's say it gets held up in customs, then someone needs to provide that data. And if you don't provide that data within 10 days, then it is sent back. And while it sits for 10 days, it's going to get additional fees incurring each day. And so it is going to become an even larger bill to foot.
Okay. We're getting towards the end of our time. We've got a couple more questions. We'll see if we can get through these fairly quickly. If the product itself does not fall under a tariff, but it includes, say, a dust bag or extra strap that would be a textile, would the tariff apply?
Great question. Yes, it's at the line item level. So you could have a shipment that has one item that has a tariff because it is manufactured in China. You could have another item that is manufactured in Vietnam that may not have this tariff. However, depending on these items, note that this is just the tariff for Chinese origin goods, for example. Additional tariffs still apply because there is no de minimis. Now, that again depends on the commodity. The whatever strap is going to have a different, tariff code than the bag.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification on that. Okay, so for our last question today, how should very small teams prioritize between finding non-China owned supply chains, renegotiating with current vendors in China to mutually absorb or to offset those new tariffs, potentially moving warehouses to a in a post 321 world, raising product prices, or taking the hit on cart conversion rates, or should they just simply wait and see? How should the small teams tackle making those decisions?
Yeah, this is a lot, right? This is why I think you want to get help from someone that can help with your understanding what the implications are for you. I would start with that before deciding that all these things need to be done. I think it's not necessarily all of those things. It may be some of those strategies that apply to you, and prioritizing what is that most critical thing that is going to be, it may just be, negotiating with your vendor and kind of, absorbing and having a different deal. It may just be a pricing strategy, and the 25% really does not have as much as an implication on your product. I've spoken to merchants where, this hasn't been such a big implication. They've just passed it on to their customers. And so I think one or two of these are going to be your ultimate strategy, but it does require you to do an analysis that is very specific, work with, a provider that understands the implications and that can guide you through this so that you're not nobody is an expert on trade. That's why, we want to be you want to go to the subject matter expert that can help you. And it's a lot to take. I don't know that sitting back and not doing anything is also the right decision, right? Ultimately, this is, you look at the international, depending on how much of your business is impacted, this could be very, very real for most brands.
Absolutely. Ratna, you've shared some really incredible information during the last hour. I know we're getting requests for things like recordings and additional notes. So first thing, we will be sending out a recording after the event. Second, please go to the Tariff and Trade Hub if you have any questions about what's happening in real time. And third, I'll ask Hannah to drop into the meeting chat a link if you want a growth consultation, if you want to have a conversation with a team member here at Flavor Cloud. We're happy to talk to you, talk through some of those strategies, and help you determine what's best for your business and give you some options there. So, so with that, big thank you for all of you for attending. It looks like we still have questions coming in. So what we are going to do, we will set up some casual office hour Q&A sessions similar to this. If you have future questions, we'll make sure that we're doing this on a regular, especially as things are changing, on a regular basis, so that you can join, come ask your questions on the spot and get the answers that you need. So with that, thank you, Ratna. Thank you all for attending. We appreciate you participating, and you'll receive a follow-up email from us shortly afterwards with a recording and also a link to book a consultation if you'd like a growth consultation. So with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, folks.